The world over, there's a greater proportion of women. Women tend to outlive men. Men die disproportionately due to illness or wars. So we are one of the few countries in the world, apart from China, where that's not the case. So the beginnings of the talk of a skew in the overall sex ratio came up when British officials started counting using the census. The first census was in 1881. They counted and they noticed that there was a skew at that time. And this is followed up with discoveries of female infanticide in what was then called Rajputana, that is now Rajasthan or Punjab. Families were in fact killing the baby girls that were being born into the family. And the phrase that was used by the British, and it was a very accurate phrase actually, they said the reasons were pride and purse. What do they mean by pride? They meant that the fear that they would not be able to find a good match, and that if they were not in a position to pay, which is the purse part of the story, dowry, then the girl might go unmarried, which would be a terrible sort of fate for her. So rather to kill her off as a baby. So these figures were significant enough to then make a difference to sex ratios. After independence, this skew in the sex ratio was discovered in the 1970s by demographers. And that was the even more alarming thing. They noticed a decline that is continued after independence. What reasons could be put to this? So it was considered a puzzle, a mystery. Following from there, we have yet another moment, the 1980s and 90s, when it was not just the overall decline, but a decline in children. And then, of course, they discovered the so-called sex ratio at birth, where they saw the real problem. This was the time when amniocentesis and subsequently ultrasound testing entered our country, and families were resorting to sex-selective abortions. It began in our big cities. It began in cities like Bombay, where activists discovered how large numbers of middle-class women flocked to these ultrasound centers. Signs would be put up on local trains, for instance, saying, pay 500 now, save 50,000 later, implying 500 was the cost of getting a test done, and 50,000, of course, in those days is the cost of a dowry. As a consequence of a great deal of activism, first in the state of Maharashtra, in 1986, a ban was put in place against amniocentesis testing. Subsequently, in 1994, a national law was created, and then it included also issues around ultrasound.